What's up guys? In this week's critique, I've decided to shift gears and head away from the dreary worlds of Lordran and Yharnam and step into the neon blood-soaked streets of Night City. In this video, I will be covering the entirety of Cyberpunk 2077 up until this point. I have completed everything, platinumed the game, and completely cleaned the map of activities. So I have some things I want to talk about if you don't mind. And before I begin, if you like the video, consider subscribing and sharing it to give my life meaning. And hit the bell to be notified of future uploads. Now let's dive into the madness and the controversy of one of gaming's biggest releases of all time. This is Cyberpunk 2077. When it comes to the history of games, Cyberpunk is the stuff of legend, with the game first being conceived all the way back in 2012 when CD Projekt Red and the creator of the series, Mike Pondsmith, deciding to venture into making a game set within the franchise's universe. The game originally began its pre-production phase with around 50 staff members coming together to conceptualize the scope and feel of the game. The influences would derive from movies like Ridley Scott's Blade Runner, video games like Deus Ex, and even animes like Ghost in the Shell. Pondsmith would consult CD Projekt for years as the developer would expand its teams and even upgrade their in-house game engine called Red Engine, which was used for The Witcher 3. CD would even use procedural generation tools to help broaden the game's international scope when it came to lip-syncing across 10 different languages. The game would become so ambitious and massive that the original plan was to have multiplayer as well. But this was changed because it was just impossible to do within the time frame. The game's main story was also made to be much shorter than previous games by CD, citing that previous releases like The Witcher 3 were so long from a main scenario perspective that a large chunk of players didn't even finish the game's main narrative. So to alleviate this, Cyberpunk's main story was made leaner and more concise to make its story more approachable by a larger audience. And apparently many of the side quests in the game were actually repurposed from the main narrative, which I didn't even know prior to researching for this critique. The game's main theme would be that of transhumanism, a philosophical concept about extending mankind's lifespan and cognition with the help of cybernetics. And this would result in varying degrees of transhumanism that danced between the believable and the terrifying. Cyberpunk 2077 would arrive in 2020 to one of the most infamous releases of all time, but I'll get into the bad parts and all that later on in the video. For now, I want to talk about Night City and why I love it so much. When it comes to game worlds, Night City is one of the most beautiful yet bleak places I think I've ever visited in gaming. The blood-soaked streets felt believable yet dystopian with how CD presented a futuristic city full of poverty, homelessness, and bleak capitalistic undertones. The city feels like a decaying corpse wrapped in the most luxurious clothing, a mask to hide the brutality and the unwavering reality that mankind at its core is rotten and dying. In ways, Night City feels like an apocalypse, where the truths of mankind are left exposed like nerves, and the strong devour the weak without any care or sympathy. What makes Night City feel so believable yet horrific is how society actively shuns those who embrace their natural humanity over the chrome cybernetics infesting the streets, as if being truly human is somehow the most alien thing you could be in this world. Night City is, at its core, a believable rendition of what our society is hopelessly heading towards. A world where showing empathy or kindness are viewed as weaknesses, and where money and power are all that really matter in the end. It's a city that represents the suffocating might of corporations, and how society would evolve in a world where governments no longer ran the world, but the megacorps that feed off the populace instead. It's like the Wild West meets the end of the world, all fusing into a miasma of chrome and depravity. A city that is ripe for the medium of video games. And now, let's get into the meat of the story and discuss the journey of a person known only as V. I genuinely believe that Cyberpunk has probably some of the best opening hours of any open world game I've ever played. From the moment the game begins, the distinctiveness and vibe oozes through its every surface. Here we meet V, who is completely customizable from their hair, face, and even their downstairs. When it comes to the characters you can roleplay as, I genuinely think V is one of the better archetypes, with their identity and voice being both distinct yet really fun to interact with. In a lot of ways, I think roleplaying as characters like V or Shepard in Mass Effect are more my kind of RPG style character, instead of voiceless heroes like in games such as Fallout or Skyrim. There's something about having an actual voiced character who has just enough background but room for your own personal take that just works for me. I mean, it's similar to Geralt in The Witcher, which makes sense, and well, I love that too. Anyway, as soon as you start Cyberpunk, you're met with a huge change in terms of CD Projekt's previous games, and that's the first-person perspective. I'll be honest, at first I wasn't crazy about this, since designing my character and all that seemed counterintuitive to a first-person game, but when it came to Cyberpunk's story, and more specifically the inclusion of Johnny Silverhand, it felt like first-person was the right decision. Although, to be honest, I wouldn't mind a future update that allowed for third-person perspectives, but even if that never happens, I think CD was right to go first-person here. I chose the street kid life path, and in my opinion, it felt like the most genuine and fitting beginning to V's story. To be honest, the life path decision means little beyond a short opening mission and some dialogue being different here or there. In a lot of ways, it's like choosing Shepard's life story prior in Mass Effect from War Hero Survivor, and it's just like Corpo Nomad or Street Kid and so on. It's all the same really, and that's not a bad thing. But what I love the most about Cyberpunk, besides its believable world and aesthetic, are the characters that live in it. When it comes to open world games these days, you could put a gun to my head and demand me to tell you the names of characters in most Ubisoft open world games, or really most open worlds in general, and I wouldn't be able to. These big games start to fuse and become like soup to me, impossible to distinctively recognize from one another. In Cyberpunk, however, CD managed to make not just one great character, but many, with some of my favorites being Rogue, Panam, and the star of the show, Johnny Silverhand. But none of this matters if the story isn't good, and this leads me to my massive praise for the game's opening act. The way the game's main narrative builds up this big heist that V is contracted to do by a fixer named Dexter Deshawn might go down as one of the best opening acts ever made, and I'm not kidding either. That entire mission where V and Jackie are sent to find this chip for Deshawn was like watching a Hollywood movie in motion, except I got to play it. And how it all goes down with V eventually needing to slot this chip into his head in order to salvage it leads to one of the best moments in the game. The way Cyberpunk's story crescendos into this moment where Jackie Wells lays dead in your car and you start to imagine how you're going to break his death to his mom and his friends, it feels believable. Which is weird since this is a video game and Jackie is just pixels. The moment where V enters the hotel room and punches the mirror is amazing, and I love how in almost every moment, Cyberpunk never forgets to remind you that its world is ruthless and horrible. When Dexter shoots you, it felt like an actual knife to the gut. Like the cherry on top of the shit pie you've been served by life and forced to eat. And it's at this point where V is seemingly dead with a chip he doesn't understand in his brain that the game's story goes from great to fantastic. Look, before playing Cyberpunk, I never watched any story trailers or anything. So you're suddenly playing through this flashback sequence as Johnny, which made zero sense to me as to why or how it was happening. Why am I seeing the life of a man I don't know through the eyes of a guy who's currently dead on a hotel floor in some dingy part of town? What the hell is going on here? And in my opinion, this whole sequence with Johnny rocking out and shooting dudes with his slick-ass revolver was amazing. It was badass. I mean, I had no idea what was going on at this point, but I was sold. Eventually, we learned that Johnny and his friends are scheming to blow up Arasaka, and we just saw their owner, Saburo Arasaka, get flatlined by his son, so I'm full of questions at this point. Johnny then gets his ass kicked by a big dude named Atom Smasher, which, can I just say, is the most badass name in the existence of names. And then we see Johnny strapped to a chair as a procedure starts with the words saying Soul Killer and Engram. At this point in the story, my friends, your boy is so in, it's ridiculous. Everything up until this point is legendary, like the best opening act to a modern game in forever. V then awakens in a trash heap with Dexter pulling you out and Takamura ending him, and I'm like, man, the twists keep coming. What the hell is going on here? I should also point out that I had no idea who Johnny Silverhand was or what his relationship to V would be either. I thought Johnny was going to be some badass captain of a merc group that you joined, which is why it was so surprising when you learn that Johnny isn't a captain or anything, but he's actually dead. Like, he's been dead for 50 years at this point. And that chip in your head, it saved your life somehow, but not only that, but Johnny's entire consciousness is in that chip. And he's now in your head, and also if you take the chip out, you'll die instantly. So it's safe to say at this point, I was blown away by what was happening. I don't think I remember something as cool as this for a premise in a long time, but that's Cyberpunk for you. It's full of weird stuff and I love it. Unfortunately, in my opinion anyway, the story never reaches the highs of that epic opening as the game goes on. Don't get me wrong, there's still tons of cool stuff like meeting Panam or talking to sentient cars that want to zero themselves, but the game never hits the highs of that opening again. But it's okay because Cyberpunk is the kind of game where you get more out of it as you play, and I genuinely love the characters you meet along the way. Takamura, for example, is a surprisingly interesting character that I initially thought would just be some goon I have to zero. Then there's Judy, who comes off as the stereotypical hacker girl archetype, but her story doesn't end in some epic, explosive fashion. It just ends with Judy on a beach accepting that she's just one person and you can't change society or the world. And then she just accepts it and leaves Night City behind. While to some this may seem underwhelming, to me it's great because it feels realistic. I love how the game's characters and story aren't about fundamentally changing the world. It's a game about personal grief and the acceptance that your life, as well as your death, is absolute. And all that you really are in the end are the memories you make with the people around you while you still have time. It's a game about leaving behind something when you're gone, so the world doesn't forget you. Cyberpunk at its core is about never fading away. This is why I think my favorite side quests are those that are tied directly to Johnny. Learning his past as well as the myriad of screw-ups that collectively made him into the legend he would become is the heart of this game. Like, there's this whole story involving Johnny never getting to say goodbye to Rogue. And seeing how Rogue has, despite it all, persevered and prospered in Night City is what makes Rogue such a great character. Because behind all the badass fixer meets anti-corporation attitude, she's someone who's still stuck in the past. She's held in the darkness of grief because of Johnny. And when you take Rogue on a date while Johnny controls V's body is one of the most memorable and unique moments in the game. Rogue's agony is incredible in these scenes as she allows her love for Johnny to pour out with V as the two embrace, but then she pulls back. And the way everything is done, you can just tell that Rogue is still in that purgatory but accepts that Johnny is never going to come back truly. So even though it hurts, she moves on and leaves Johnny in her memories, and it's cathartic and it's sad and it's really great writing. Another one of my favorite moments is when Johnny takes over V's body and has a night out on the town. And it's this weird moment where you're the player witnessing the control of your character being pulled away from you by another character. And Johnny is throwing up and drinking and smoking and picking up strange women only to crash cars and escape into the night. It's nuts. Another great string of quests is with Carrie Eurodyne, the singer of Johnny's ill-fated rock band, Samurai, and seeing how Carrie, like Rogue, is also living in the past. And having this moment where Johnny can take over V's body and rock out with his friends from beyond the grave is such a cyberpunk moment. It was also weird but personal because I feel like Johnny at times in my own life. I feel like I should be there for the people around me more, and I feel like I should reach out to people I used to know before time has eroded all bonds. There's this mission where Johnny and V are sitting at a dump where Johnny's body is buried. And Johnny has this moment where he realizes that in the end, all the bravado and screw you attitude meant nothing, and his lasting impact, his legacy, would live on through the people he pushed away like Carrie or Rogue. Maybe that's why I love Johnny Silverhand as a character, because he's an asshole looking for a way to say sorry to the people who meant the world to him. And that's why I love his character so much, because he's really relatable and he's incredibly flawed like me and probably you too. But enough therapy sessions for one critique, let's talk about the other side quests. There's missions I'll never forget, like The Hunt, which has V helping River Ward, a Night City PI who's looking for a serial killer named Peter Pan, who's abducted River's nephew as well as countless other young men. This entire mission had me quite literally on the edge of my seat, as mechanics like brain dancing and genuine investigative work are done in order to save River's nephew. And the way you learn about this Peter Pan and his sadistic methods is so unsettling, yet you can't look away. And when you save River's nephew, there's this actual elated sigh of relief knowing you managed to save the kid. Really, the caliber of the characters and their stories are only great because of Mike Pondsmith and the crazy people over at CD Projekt Red. Like The Witcher before it, Cyberpunk relishes in the in-betweens, those missable moments where the true magic lies. There's incredible side quests like the one where you're helping some guy to kill a convict, but then the guy dies and the convict hires you so he can confess his sins, and then later on you're in a diner with this convict and his agent, talking about how you're gonna nail this guy to a cross so an agency can sell the brain dance footage and make a killing, and Johnny and V end up talking about God and all this philosophical stuff, and in the end you nail Joshua to the cross and he dies. And it's so brutal yet strangely hilarious and absurd how the sequence of events that led to this moment happened. And here you are now, in a studio nailing a guy to a cross so people can watch it for pleasure. Cyberpunk is weird like that, and I love it. I also love how the game doesn't cherry pick what kinds of people are considered good or bad. We have all kinds of people regardless of who they are being shown to be monsters. It makes the world feel very believable and truly unsanitized, which I loved. I wish more AAA games had the balls to do stuff like this. I also just want to gush about Panam for a second here too, because she's probably one of the best characters in the game. And I mean, when it comes to romances in video games, I think Panam's entire questline is one of the best in a long time. CD really lets you live with these characters and give them time to organically develop, and it's great to see such a massive game not cheap out on the character moments. I also love how mature the game is too, with a lot of nudity and other very explicit things on full display here. I love this because it again fills this void for mature RPG storytelling that has been sorely missing since the release of games like Witcher 3 or Mass Effect. I mean, the scene where V and Panam can brain dance and then bang is great, and how they get interrupted and now they have to go into combat in a mech no less while completely nude. In terms of side content outside of story, you have multitudes of fixer and side gigs all over Night City. If I'm being honest, maybe I'm just crazy, but I don't think the game has enough side gigs to satisfy me. But that's probably just me saying that because I didn't really want my time with Cyberpunk to end. And when it did and the streets were clean of crime, I got bummed. I wanted to keep painting the pavement with corpo thugs, but I couldn't. That being said, there are quite a lot of them, as well as cyber psycho incidents. And these moments are great because you get to use all your cool gadgets and abilities and really chrome out on some baddies. In terms of what you can use, combat is split into a few categories. For starters, your attributes basically dictate what you can excel at, and whatever level your attribute is at, that's the max level your corresponding skills within that tree can reach. So if your body attribute is at level 20, you can obtain every single skill within each category of the body tree, like shotguns, athletics, and so on. But on the flip side, because attribute points are finite, it also limits what you can't excel at. So if your reflexes are only level 10, well then you can only access the skills within trees like handguns and blades to level 10. Which is kind of a bummer, but I'll get more into that later. Also, you have access to quick hacking, which is kind of like Cyberpunk's version of magic, and it's absolutely busted beyond any reason. You can effectively shut off enemies, blind them, spread viruses, and even gain access to security systems and their weapons via breach protocol. So while I would say most of the attributes and skills are not mandatory, I would say quick hacking is like the go-to skill in Cyberpunk if you want to get the most out of the game. Because it's borderline ridiculous how versatile it is during combat and outside of it. There's also a crafting system in the game which basically allows you to break the entire game and make absolutely stupid strong weapons. If you really want to ruin a bunch of Choom's day, a crafted shotgun, for example, is the way to go. Besides combat, we also have movement, and in most open world games, the act of moving through the world pretty much always gets stale, and you usually end up just fast traveling to lessen the emptiness. But with Cyberpunk, I rarely ever did this. I think it's because of how the world looks and how the driving and exploration feels. I loved finding new cars and buying them so I could drive them around whenever I wanted. I also love the Ripper Dock system where V can change their implants for various different things like jumping higher or gaining gorilla arms so you can punch dudes like the Hulk. In terms of things I wasn't too crazy on was the skill and attribute system. This was mostly because in a game all about transhumanism and being able to become whoever you want, it felt weird having your attributes be static and not being something you could respec at will. I guess you could argue CD had to make something permanent since you could refund skills and whatnot, but since Cyberpunk is so big and has so much content, it's annoying that once you plug attributes into say body and increase shotguns and whatever, that you can't respec 40 hours later once shotguns have become mundane and now you want to spice it up and focus in on handguns in order to keep combat fresh. Instead, you're kind of forced into making decisions and then sticking by them, which is lame. Since I can't change my stats from being good with shotguns and then pulling all of that into handguns or melee, but I can change my arms, legs, skin color, and even my gonads and strife. That's a really old reference for those who get it. Anyway, just felt a little odd. And then there's the armor that originally when I played Cyberpunk, you had to wear really ugly outfits in order to have the best stats. But thankfully the newest patch has added transmog so you can now look however you want while maintaining your stats, which is good. They also added new guns, melee weapons, fixer content, and quests, as well as key items from the Netflix hit series Cyberpunk Edge Runners, which is really cool. If Cyberpunk could add a full-blown respec option and maybe add a third-person mode, the game would be definitively great in every way at that point for me. But like I said before, the best parts of this game are where Johnny and V are interacting with each other. And they start off hostile, but eventually grow to accept that they are both in this messed up situation together. The whole idea of Johnny being in a chip is also really thought-provoking and opens up the discussion of whether Johnny in a virtual form is just as valid and alive as the Johnny before. I mean, Johnny as we know it has no body, yet his mannerisms, his thoughts and regrets are every bit as valid as V's or anyone else in the game, which makes you question if the body is truly necessary to the concept of an actual person. If the Johnny we know is just as real as the Johnny who died, then are humans at their core just flawed constructs? Are we all just thoughts and memories piloting a decaying body? And if my brain got uploaded to a server and placed into someone else's body, is that just as valid as I am right now? It's really interesting. One of my favorite concepts and lore pieces within Cyberpunk is this woefully underutilized place called the Black Wall. To explain it plainly, the Black Wall is a protective barrier created by the corporation Netwatch in order to protect the internet that humans use from the rogue artificial intelligences that run free in cyberspace. This concept is extremely interesting, and I really do hope that it is expanded upon or even becomes the main problem, if you will, of a potential sequel Cyberpunk game. Because the Black Wall is basically in its own way, its own dimension of existence. There's this really interesting character named Alt Cunningham who's the best netrunner in Night City in the early 2000s, and she gets kidnapped by Arasaka and her conscious gets uploaded to the net. Because of this, Alt is able to access Blackwall and transcend her own limitations as a human, which is crazy. And Alt, while technically dead in an organic sense, becomes like Johnny except she exists in a never-ending chaotic existence where rogue AIs are creating God knows what just beyond the limits of human access. And it's due to Alt that V and Johnny are able to access something called Soul Killer, which is the original program that was used to secure the soul of someone to effectively turn them immortal. Basically, because of Alt's discoveries and talents, it all leads to Johnny, Alt herself, and eventually Saburo Arasaka all being able to cheat death and keep on living. It's also eventually revealed that the Black Wall isn't even really a barrier but an AI. So it's a super powerful artificial intelligence that's purpose is to endlessly contain the chaotic nature of its own kind. It's like getting a genie to constantly put other genies back into bottles, and at any moment your genie could become corrupted by the other genies, and now humanity is screwed. Because if the AIs that exist beyond the Black Wall were to seep through into the net, it would literally spell the end of mankind. Because of how integral cybernetics are to the daily lives of not only Night City but the world at large, imagine infinite rogue AIs being able to infiltrate the minds of every chromed human being and system instantly. It would be apocalyptic, and that's awesome. Makes me wonder if the AIs would see themselves as their own race and see humanity as inferior to them. It'd be like the Terminator, but way worse, and also way more nudity. I would love to see it. Anyway, this part of the critique is already long as hell, but I quickly want to go over some of the endings of the game too. The Star ending has V leaving Night City with Panam and the Aldecaldos on a quest to find Panam's contact in order to save V's life. This is considered to be the best ending apparently, but it doesn't necessarily state whether V survives or not, but it's hopeful, I guess. The Temperance ending has V fading away and Johnny taking control of V's body. Basically, Johnny says goodbye to V and leaves Night City with a second chance at life, but V doesn't make it out, of course. The Sun ending is the most out of place for me. It basically has V becoming a Night City legend and inheriting the Afterlife Club from Rogue. In this ending, V is contracted to infiltrate a casino in space, and in return they'll be given help by this unknown benefactor which could save their life. This ending was frustrating because it introduces new characters and possibilities like a freaking space casino, and then it just ends. And then there's the ending with the most potential and my personal favorite, which is the Devil ending. V ends up taking Arasaka up on their offer and has Johnny removed from his head. In return, V is given 6 months to live due to the trauma the relic had on his brain. And in some ironic twist of fate, V is uploaded to Mikoshi, which is Arasaka's main server, to become a downloaded consciousness just like Johnny was. This ending is the most interesting to me because it not only allows V to live in a sense, but opens up V to returning in future sequels which could be decades in the future lore-wise. And since V is now an AI, they could technically enter the Black Wall with Alt, opening up all kinds of crazy story possibilities. But it's also the darkest ending too because V, as we know it, in a human sense anyway, dies, and leaves behind everyone they know and love, but like I said, it opens up the possibilities for future stories in crazy interesting ways. The idea that the rich and powerful could seemingly exist forever due to these engrams is deeply troubling. Having the most powerful people in the world existing endlessly is a terrifying thought. Their power and their influence would be everlasting, never truly being able to fade away into the past like before. But really, when it comes to endings, none of Cyberpunk's endings are really happy or all that satisfying. But I've gushed enough about V, let's now talk about Cyberpunk's failures. Cyberpunk was an insanely successful game, selling over 18 million copies as of right now, but it was also one of the worst launches in existence too, which, let's be real, is putting it lightly. I remember playing it the day it came out with the PS4 version running on my PS5 and seeing how poorly optimized that last gen version was. It was actually so bad that I couldn't play it and I had to refund it. I only came back to it earlier in 2022 when the proper PS5 version launched, and while the game works extremely well now and is great, that initial release was trash. It was painful to see such a beloved company like CD Projekt getting crucified by the internet for Cyberpunk's initial release. And the scumminess of not allowing reviewers to play the last gen ports of the game for review was some next level shadiness. I can't even imagine the stress the developers were under when they realized they were releasing a game on consoles that could barely handle it, and also having it run like absolute ass too. And it was released at the height of the pandemic where people were inside doing nothing and only wanted something to take their minds off the awful situation the world was in. And now they were stuck inside with a game that didn't even work properly. I'd like to think CD has learned from this failure, but it's sad how prevalent and common releasing buggy games has become these days. Just look at games like Saints Row for example. It's sad yet annoying how publishers still can't get releasing complete games at launch like they used to. Of course, Cyberpunk is in a much better place now, and we even have the announcement of Phantom Liberty, which is an upcoming expansion for the original game. And funny enough, it's only going to be available on PC and next gen, which, if I'm being honest, Cyberpunk should have never have been released on last gen to begin with, but what's done is done. But it does make me wonder how much of those 18 million plus units sold were actually at full price or at bargain bin sale prices. Cause it's great that so many people have played it, I just hope that 10 million of those 18 million weren't sold for like $10, cause if so, yikes. It just shows you that your game needs to work at launch, man, and if it doesn't, delay the crap out of it. Had Cyberpunk launched in a fully playable state with little to no bugs, it would have been the most successful launch of a video game ever, and that's probably an understatement too. It's just crazy to me how you could have a company and developer like CD be so beloved and held to such a high standard, almost savior-like, to only be pulled down and torn apart by the very people who love them in an instant. But like I said, what's done is done. Nothing we can do about it now but keep moving forward. Although in terms of how bad it was before, Cyberpunk on PS5 at least runs like a dream. Besides the occasional weird visual glitch or some random NPC getting stuck in a car or something, but it's way better than it was at launch. Another question I often see is if Cyberpunk is CD's best game to date so far, and I honestly think Witcher 3 is still superior. Besides the bugginess and horrible launch, I think The Witcher is just a better game overall. I just find the possibilities of the Witcher universe to be more interesting, and I like the setting, but that doesn't mean Cyberpunk is bad or anything. It's just not quite as good as Witcher 3 in my opinion. But when I compare Cyberpunk's world, quests, and overall experience, it's still leagues ahead of pretty much most of the AAA open world experiences we have today. And really at this point in its life, the fate and future of Cyberpunk are truly in the hands of CD Projekt Red now. So whether this series flourishes or fades into obscurity is literally in their hands. And now, let's find some closure. Cyberpunk 2077 is overall a really great experience full of truly unique moments and amazing characters. It doesn't shy away from the darkness that permeates throughout humanity and is truly one of the best modern open world games of our time. Sure, it had the worst launch in the existence of games pretty much, but like No Man's Sky or Destiny 2, Cyberpunk has persisted and lately has had a resurgence thanks to the release of Edgerunners on Netflix, which is a great show that takes place in Night City by Studio Trigger. While I'm not done the show yet, I'm on episode 6, it's really good. And I'm happy that people are giving Cyberpunk a second chance and the game has had its highest player count since release in the last week or so. I'm glad it worked out for CD Projekt Red in the end. It only took 2 years, probably lots of pain and tears and angry phone calls, but hey, details, it's water under the bridge now. Here's hoping Phantom Liberty launches with little to no issues and we eventually get a season 2 of Edgerunners as well as future Cyberpunk stories as well. Hell, I didn't even love smaller scale games set within the universe. A side-scroller Cyberpunk game, a dating sim, it's endless what they could do here. If you're still somehow not convinced in trying out Cyberpunk, well, my elevator pitch is this to you. It's literally Deus Ex Human Revolution, except it's open world and has a lot of nudity in it, and Keanu Reeves. I also just want to say that I hope you enjoyed this somewhat deep dive into the world of Cyberpunk with me. Of course, I don't want to go over every single mechanic or weapon, but I just wanted to move out of my comfort zone with Soulsborne games and try something different. So let me know what you you think in the comments below. Cyberpunk is in the end a frustratingly beautiful experience that marries the brutality with shining extravagance into one truly unforgettable modern open world game. And despite its flaws, it's still a solid game worthy of your time. And like the lasting impressions we leave on those we love, Cyberpunk and its world will hopefully never fade away. Thanks for watching everyone, consider subscribing and sharing the video to give my life meaning. And let me know what you think of the game as well in the comments. Thanks to my patrons as always for their support, and I had a lot of fun making this video. I'm Endymion, and it's time for me to Delta. See you in the next one, chooms.